Lustig and Koester give us a summary of approaches in their textbook, but they also, without really proposing this as an approach per se, provide us with a model for approaching culture as well. Let's look at the summary and proceed to what I call their societal questions approach. Here's the chart that they provided in their book regarding the different ways of treating the different approaches. I don't agree with it on a few minor points, so I created one of my own on the next slide here. You'll notice that in a couple of minor places, I've adjusted the terminology for my own understanding of how it might relate, and I have simplified Hall's terminology with low context on the left and high context on the right consistently. Also, in the last column, I have summarized the terminology and simplified it based on how my students prefer to carry forward the different concepts, having taught this course or having taught a course on intercultural competence since 2014. If you take nothing else from this, just take the last column, try to understand each dyad and use them, those terms, in real intercultural situations. And I believe that you will be on your way to becoming more interculturally competent with the more experience you have in intercultural situations, with intercultural differences, and understanding them using this terminology. Since in this presentation we're focusing on Lustig and Koester's approach, let's look at what they say about intercultural competence. Quote, simply knowing what is appropriate and what has worked to accomplish your personal objectives in your own culture may not, and in all likelihood will not, have similar results when you interact with culturally different others. Intercultural competence usually requires alternative choices for actions. Before acting, you should contemplate, draw on your culture-specific knowledge, and make behavioral choices that are appropriate for interacting with members of the other culture. The patterns of culture shape, but do not determine the mental programming of its people. Because cultural patterns define how people see and define reality, they are a powerful emotional force in competent intercultural interaction, end quote. So the skill for intercultural competence is in making the choices of how to behave that will make you effective and appropriate in intercultural situations. And that's how I've derived my definition of intercultural competence, by revising theirs and adding the more complex term understanding. This definition also combines Fontini and Deerdorf's approach as well. But as we've also seen in our survey of a few of the intercultural frameworks previously, we've reviewed them thus far. The groups approach existential questions of humanity. Each group has to approach existential questions of humanities, relations between each other, and definition of humanness in different ways. But all groups have to answer broad questions about how life should be organized. Lustig and Koester provide a listing of these questions and approaches to those questions, which also provides us with a more question-based approach. I provide a few examples here. How do people in this group or culture define or evaluate activity? How do they regard and define work, for example? And Lustig and Koester, based on Kluckhohn and Strootbeck, expand these questions into what we can call, which I have named, the societal questions approach that they have outlined. Here's what it looks like. They combine a variety of authors, interculturalists, and others with Kluckhohn and Strootbeck in defining the dyads or triads that people use to answer these questions. We can use these to understand our own first culture and the cultures we cross into. And so they trace their approach through Kluckhohn and Strootbeck, but give us more terminology along the relational orientation. When people relate to one another, do they prefer or value equality or hierarchy or informal or formal relationships? Or do they honor achieved status over ascribed status, which means a title earned like a doctoral degree over an ascribed family name, for example, and so forth. I won't cover all these, but have a summary chart of what I would recommend based on that final column that I showed you in slide 3. You'll see that in a few slides here. More from Lustig and Koester. What is a group's treatment of the individual, and how does the group define the self? Take a look at the list. I also add at the bottom whether fame is valued or humility. Think about this. What others can you add? When asking about how humans relate to the world and the group or culture's preferred approach, we can see some well-defined attitudes and answers. Is the world understood only by science, or is there something controlling the universe from outside of it? Different groups have different questions and different answers, and all of those can come into conflict, whether interculturally or intergenerationally. Finally, the relationship to time is treated. How does this group define or value time? And you can look there and see how they've divided them up. And so here's the final summary with the easiest, in my opinion, most understandable terms in the first column, organized by whether they are low context on the left or high context, which is the right side of the column. Then I correlate the societal questions that correspond to that dyad that's in the left column on the right. Whether you take the terms in the first column or the questions in the second, you'll be well served with tools to help you recognize cultural differences, diagnose what is going on in any cross-cultural or interpersonal conflict, and with experience and time, you will be the interculturally competent expert teaching me. So take it and use it. While I use these videos as presentations for the courses I teach on intercultural competence, they're also freely available for anyone to watch. So please feel free to like it or subscribe to this channel as you see fit, or to share it. Your feedback is valuable to me to make sure that things are clear. And may you find the peace that you are looking for.